But let's assume for a moment that the Prime Minister's plan not to cut public expenditure significantly holds steady. If that is the case, then you are beyond a shadow of a doubt facing very significant tax increases. Now, difficult to be precisely how big, but I think we can begin to make a guess.
But they couldn't be only on, quotes, the rich. They'd have to be on everybody.
No. Well, of course, there's already an increase of 10 pence in the upper rate from 40 to 50 to the rich. But the rich can't remotely provide the sort of money we're needing. That's relative petty cash compared to what will be needed. So you've had an increase of 10 pence in the standard rate in the upper rate for the rich. I think you may well get 5 pence on the standard rate. You may well get VAT at 20%. And even if you got that, you would not begin to bridge the gap that needs to be bridged. So it would be significantly larger than that, on the assumption that you aren't going to make public expenditure reductions. So I think the debate needs now to concentrate on the reality of where we are. And it doesn't matter who's in government.
Yeah. So,
this mess isn't going to change with a change of government. Someone, whoever is in government, now or later, is going to have to correct the public finances. And if they don't, if they just continue with the finances at this huge deficit, at some stage our national credit rating will collapse. If that happened, sterling would be in difficulty. If that happened, you'd get soaring interest rates. And all the good done during the 90s, when we took a lot of pain to get inflation down, will have been thrown away. So the situation we are now in is pretty serious, and it's built up over many years. Normally, let me just make this final point. Normally, in years when you have a good economic record, you begin to repay debt, and you bring the deficit down. What has happened, particularly since 1999, is that even in good years, with a boom, the debt has risen. And now, of course, the boom has gone, we have the debt, and we have the problems of the recession adding to that on a daily basis.
So you, I assume, talk to current Conservative leaders who must be clammy and white-faced as they confront some of these statistics at the same time.
My conversation with current Conservatives is private.
Of course it is.
And I have my own views. I speak for myself and no one else. But I think the public really need to understand how deep this is. These silly exchanges about Mr. 10% and things of that sort totally underrate the difficulties that we are now facing. People had better understand this is an unprecedented situation. We have never seen anything like this in your lifetime or mine.
So, as it were, the old politics, which says that politicians must never talk about cuts or tax rises or they'll be punished by the voters, is probably genuinely old politics.
Well, I think there are two things.
People can now talk more honestly.
Well, I have no idea about that. It may well be that if you talk about cuts, you get punished by the electorate as you did in the past. But there are two things crossing over here, aren't there? There's the question of whether you can talk about cuts, and there's the question of trust. Trust has been eroded over a long period. And I think the present government have done a great deal to damage trust in Parliament and trust in government. But now the public are going to find out in the next few years exactly how serious what is now happening will be. I think the party that tells them the truth in the most explicit terms will be the long-term gainer. Whether they will be the immediate short-term gainer in the battle of oratory between now and the general election, I can't say. But in the medium and long term, the party that tells the public how deep the problem is and what needs to be done about it is the party that will earn the respect of the public and the trust of the public, and the party that will be the long-term gainer, in my view.
You would urge either of the parties in that case to say, listen, 5p on income tax or deep cuts, that kind of language?
I think we have to address the reality. You've got a deficit of 180 billion. Can you continue with that? No. Have you got to narrow it? Yes. Can that be done solely by growth? No. So how do you bridge the gap? And what are the implications of that? And there are some opportunities here. When people think of cuts, I would argue that we are a heavily over-governed nation. When you have subsidy to some parts of the country greater than that's provided in Cuba, you realise you are getting to be a bit of a nanny state. There is an opportunity not just to deal with the problem, but to downsize the sum total of government, which I think we should do. And by downsize the sum total of government, I don't just mean reduce the number of MPs, though I think that is right. I do mean reduce the size of the government machine. We have no need for 120 ministers and 60 PPSs. You could reduce that by a third quite comfortably, and I'd happily explain to you how. And then when you've done that, downsize Parliament in that respect, I think you downsize what government does. You can't forever have the government increasing its role at the expense of private endeavour and the private sector. It is a route that ends eventually in national bankruptcy, which is where the government are heading us. So I think there is a philosophical opportunity to reshape the country as you deal with the problem.
It sounds to me almost as if you're saying that this is a sort of 1979 moment, if I can put it that way, where there is going to have to be a fundamental change in the direction of British politics.
I very much hope that will be the case, though in many cases the problems now are more serious than 1979. 1979 was very bad, and it was only because of the disaster of the 1970s that the reforms of the 1980s were politically possible.
Which leads, of course, me to ask you...
I think now, with the problems we've got, that there is scope for bigger and more fundamental changes in the next Parliament and beyond.
I was going to ask, obviously, whether you think David Cameron is a Margaret Thatcher-scale politician.
Well, I think he's a David Cameron politician. No one can know exactly what someone is like until they're in a position, and often events make people.
Yeah.
And I think he's going to face some very uncomfortable decisions in the future. I think he's made a remarkable job of changing the Conservative Party in the right direction for the last 2 or 3 years. And so I have a very high opinion of him. I very much hope he can do what still needs to be done.